Hey everyone, and welcome to this edition of the Politically Incorrect Podcast. My name is Jim Williams, and my guest today is Richard B. Sandler, the author of Witness to a Prosecution, The Myth of Michael Milken. Richard, welcome, and it's good to have you. It's a fascinating book. It's something that honestly everybody should read for a number of reasons, not the least of which is actually very entertaining.
Well, I thank you, Jim, and I appreciate your having me on today.
My pleasure. My first question basically is a simple one. That's what inspired you to write about Michael Milken? And perhaps there's some misconceptions surrounding what, in essence, was his prosecution.
So I was intimately involved in the prosecution, Jim.
Mhm.
I've known Mike a long time. I'd worked with him. I know the truth. I know exactly what happened, how it happened, and why it happened. And as the years went on, and Mike was still accomplishing so many things in so many areas, especially in philanthropy and medical research and education and other areas, the media was still drawn to him. Articles were continuing to be written, and the same misconceptions, quite frankly, lies, kept getting repeated over and over again. And I finally said, look, I know what happened. I know the truth. If people are going to continue to write about Mike, history deserves to know the truth. There should be a truthful record of what exists or what happened, at least. And that's why I decided that I would write the book. I know the story, and my book is very factual of what happened.
Inside the book, there's a number of different things which are fascinating. But if we could focus on the lessons that you think personally that you learned, and obviously people who read the book will learn about, the Milken case and how it even still today has resonance, specifically with regard to what's going on with former President Trump and others.
So I wrote the book for two reasons, and I think you just identified what they are. One is what I said before. What really happened to Michael Milken? Who is he? Who was he? Why was he an attractive target? And what is the true story? And the other part is what happened to Mike can happen to anybody.
Mm-hmm.
The story is also the story of prosecutorial power.
Mm-hmm.
Prosecutors have tremendous discretion. They were given through the law, through history, tremendous power to put away bad guys.
Mm-hmm.
If you use the power the way that it was intended, they will see that justice is done, meaning they will go after those people that actually violated the law, and people that did not violate the law will be treated fairly, and they will not go after them. Unfortunately,
go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. Unfortunately, an ambitious prosecutor who sees an opportunity to enhance his or her career through a prosecution has tools at his or her disposal that could really result in an injustice and unfairness to the individual, especially if they just assume the person did something wrong and never ask themselves the question, what if I'm wrong?
Well, where's the evidence, I guess, from that standpoint?
Exactly. So,
go ahead, please.
I'm sorry, Jim. You referenced today, when I see a prosecution today that gets a lot of publicity, as this one did, as the Mike Milken case got back in its day, I always question whether or not the prosecutor is trying to get publicity for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Prosecutor doing this because they think that there was a wrong, or is the prosecutor getting some personal benefit from doing this?
Mm-hmm.
So the more active, the more visible the prosecutor becomes, the more suspect I become.
It's a good point. There's an entire generation who have grown up and they have no idea what a power player Michael Milken was in the 1980s. You said that you worked with him, you know him. Give us a brief sketch of Michael Milken for those who may not know, as I said before, what an amazing player he was in the 1980s.
Okay, so Michael Milken is a very talented individual. He's got a very facile mind. A lot of people use the word brilliant. I think it probably applies, but I like to just say just a very unique mind. He has this amazing ability to look at problems, to gather as much information he can to help him deal with the problem, to use that information in the way others don't, and try to tackle issues. And when he was in college, he decided that one of the ways where he could make a difference in society would be to Wall Street, because at Wall Street is where capital is provided to entrepreneurs, provided to businesses. Businesses employ people. People are employed. They usually feel more productive and lead better lives. He always talks about the Watts riots, which most listeners probably have no idea what I'm talking about. Was during the 1960s. It was during the civil rights period. And he visited South Central Los Angeles. And he grew up in Los Angeles. And he met somebody who talked about the fact that the building that he just worked in got burnt down. And he was going to have no place to work the next day. And this was happening, in different places. And he said, wait a minute, people need to feel productive. People need to be proud of what they're doing. I actually believe that an investor in many ways is a social scientist. So he got very interested in financial markets. And he studied in school when he was at Berkeley. He studied a book that reviewed all the bonds that were issued by corporations to the public and were rated by rating agencies, and how they performed over time. And what used to happen, and I'll try to make it short, but I think you need to kind of have the background. When bonds are issued by a company, so if you take a company like today, if you took General Electric and it's issuing bonds, it has an investment banker that issues the bonds. The bonds are issued to the public. The bonds are really just promissory notes. They're debt that the company is going to pay. So if the company has the ability to make its payments, you'll get exactly what the contract provides. You'll get your interest, you'll get your principal. These bonds, when they're issued, are rated by rating agencies. It used to be the only companies that could go to the public markets are those that can get what's called an investment grade rating. Excuse me. So that would be the highest rating. An investment grade rating was really available to less than 1% of all the companies around. The biggest of the biggest and the most successful histories. But if companies got in trouble, their bonds would get re-rated. And if they got rated down low enough, they would become non-investment grade. The pejorative term that people started using was junk bonds. In the industry, they're referred to as high yield bonds, because as the price goes down, your yield goes up. Well, the study showed that if you invested in bonds that became non-investment grade, you would make more money than if you invested in just investment grade bonds. That in effect, the discount that was applied by the market to the bond was greater than the risk that the company actually wouldn't make its payments. So Mike decided that the way to really figure out how to finance companies and how to invest your money in companies that had bonds outstanding was to do research. The more information you had, the more you understood and the less your risk. So when he was in a business school at Wharton and graduated and had opportunities to go to different places on Wall Street, he chose to go to a firm called Drexel Firestone that became Drexel Burnham. And why did he choose Drexel? Not because it was the biggest or best known or most respected firm on Wall Street, but because it was deemed the best research firm on Wall Street. And to him, the basis, the foundation of all investing was research. So he went with the idea that he could do research. He could research the companies. He could research the industries. He could meet the management. And he could choose a portfolio of high yield securities that would provide outstanding returns. And this happened. Drexel allocated to him capital, and he doubled the capital in a very short time. And he started meeting with other investors on Wall Street, pension funds, insurance companies, large investors, and explained to them his theory, because he wanted to create a market at Drexel for high yield securities. And people found that his theories actually worked. And he developed a following, and he developed a marketplace for high yield securities. In that case, that way he became somewhat of a disruptor, because he created a new industry on Wall Street that the large players, the traditional investment banking firms, were not part of and were not included in. He became well known as he started doing what had never been done at Drexel, and that was doing what I call original issues of high yield securities.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm going on too long or if you want to
No,
interrupt.
go ahead.
Okay. So the idea of an original issue is that, as I said a few minutes ago, almost every company that could go to the public market had an investment grade. Well, how do you get an investment grade? You have a long history and you get rated by the agencies as a very solid company. Companies that are new don't have a large history. But Mike felt that the future was more important than the past. And if he researched new companies and he understood their industries and their management, and he believes that they had talent, then they too would pay their principal and interest when it came due. But these bonds had to sell at a higher interest rate than investment grade bonds. So it became a different market. The high yield market not only had bonds at one time were rated investment grade that lost their rating, but through Drexel, new companies were able to get financing by entrepreneurs that never got it before. And some of those people that are known to the public today are people like Ted Turner, who Drexel financed with Mike in those days, because he had the idea of a 24-hour news channel.
Sure.
Steve Wynn, who had an idea of making Las Vegas a family resort rather than an adult resort. AMC Theaters, Pulte Homes, Mattel Toys, all these companies became financed through Drexel that before Mike came along and developed this market could not get financing in the public market to grow their companies and employ literally millions and millions of people. So he became well known on Wall Street, very successful, and somewhat disliked because he was not sharing what he was doing with the other firms because they didn't understand what he was doing. He was creating a new industry within the industry that they weren't participating in. And some of the entrepreneurs that he was financing saw value in some established companies that they thought was undervalued and would offer to take over those companies. If the companies welcomed the takeover, they were friendly. If they didn't welcome, they were hostile. If there was a hostile takeover, the company didn't like the fact that this person could get financing to come after their company. They would complain to Congress. They would complain to their investment banker. So this industry within an industry became very unpopular on Wall Street. And Mike became probably one of the original disruptors, or at least for his day, a disruptor. So as I say, a disruptor. You know, Bill Gates was a disruptor when he started. You know,
Steve Jobs was a disruptor.
Steve Jobs was a total disruptor. Today, Elon Musk is a disruptor. Okay, Mark Zuckerberg is a disruptor. And throughout history, you find that people are suspect of disruptors. So that Mike became well known. At the same time, Mike really believed in just doing his business, creating value for his clients and his customers, for the companies he financed and for his investors, and was not looking for publicity. And he shied away from publicity. So he wasn't known to the media. When they reached out to do interviews, he denied the interviews. He did not do them. So you had this individual who was somewhat of a mystery person, who was getting more and more publicity, and who was financing people that, you know, were going after established companies, and it made Drexel somewhat unpopular with the establishment on Wall Street.
To the point that enter Rudy Giuliani. When we got to this point, right, I'm thinking this would have been a perfect episode of Billions, okay, with regard to Michael, who is, you know, the outlier, the maverick, and the prosecutor who wants a big fish to make a big name for himself. Enter Rudy Giuliani. I'll let you pick it up from there.
Okay, so in doing business, Mike would do business with a lot of people on Wall Street, a lot of people in the financial world. There was an individual that he and almost every firm on Wall Street did business with named Ivan Boesky. And Mr. Boesky was the most revered and respected risk arbitrageur of the time. And by risk arbitrageur, I mean he would see disruptions in value in the market and try to buy things that he thought were undervalued because they were going to have greater value later. Now, a perfect example would be if a company was rumored to be taken over. or if somebody made an offer for a company to take over them. So if their stock was selling at 20 and someone said that I'm going to make an offer at 26, the market would immediately go up. It wouldn't go to 26. And the more that the arbitrageur believed that the transaction would happen, the more the arbitrageur would buy that company at any price below 26, believing they'd get 26. So, it's a simplified way of doing it. But, Mr. Boesky was played very much in the equity markets, not in the bond market Mike was in. But he had interest or showed interest of possibly in taking over companies. Mike was introduced to him. He thought maybe he could become a bond buyer. Anyway, he did business with Mr. Boesky, as many people did. What happened was that it turned out that Mr. Boesky got caught up in an insider trading investigation that was taking place in the 80s, and it ended up that a lot of his success was based upon the fact that he was purchasing non-public information, private, confidential information, which was illegal to use in making investments at the time. He was purchasing it from other people that were violating the law that knew about upcoming mergers and acquisitions. He would pay for this information literally in bags of cash, and then he would make money off of these investments. So when one of the people that he was doing business with and paying off for information pled guilty to insider trading, that individual apparently told the prosecutors, if you go easy on me, I'm going to help you indict or go after Mr. Boesky. So Mr. Boesky ended up pleading himself. And in order to make a better deal for himself, he told the prosecutors that he would help them indict and convict other well-known players on Wall Street, the number one target being Michael Milken. So when it was announced that Ivan Boesky was pleading guilty to a felony and was involved in insider trading, the rumors started on Wall Street, and the headlines in the paper the next day were all about the Boesky plea. It wasn't just on the financial page, it was on the front page in New York City. The U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York, which covers New York City at the time, was, as you said, Rudolph Giuliani. And Mr. Giuliani, when he saw the headlines, realized that the conviction of Boesky would help his career. He had a political ambition. And the conviction of the people that Boesky told him about, especially this guy, Michael Milken, who he may never have heard of before, might help his career. So, he was described to me, we retained as one of our attorneys at the time, a lawyer named Edward Bennett Williams. Jim, you might remember.
Very famous, yes.
There's a very famous law firm in Washington, D.C. called Williams and Connolly that he started. But Edward Bennett Williams was probably the most renowned and respected defense lawyer of his time. When I first met him and we were talking about these subpoenas we got, he mentioned the fact that he was concerned about Rudy Giuliani because he considered Mr. Giuliani the biggest piece of political meat that he had seen since Thomas Dewey. Now, for listeners who don't know Thomas Dewey was the U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York, as Mr. Giuliani was. Mr. Dewey used that position to gain fame and to become governor of New York. And he actually ran and almost won against Harry Truman for president of the United States. So now we had, the perfect storm as far as we were concerned, where you had this somewhat considered reclusive, very successful entrepreneur on Wall Street who was not popular with the establishment, but was getting a lot of publicity. You had this politically ambitious prosecutor. You had somebody who actually had violated the law and admitted violating the law, telling the prosecutor, I could help you convict Michael Milken.
The perfect storm.
The perfect
storm.
Now,
the irony, it didn't come through really in the book, but question from my standpoint was, I thought when Giuliani spoke to then President Trump on behalf of Michael to pardon him, that was maybe the mea culpa, that I went after you, but I know what I did wasn't necessarily kosher. How far am I off? I'm just asking.
I think you're not off, but I think you're only talking about part of the story.
Okay.
Because after, and the book goes into great detail of exactly what
Mhm.
happened, as I said, how it happened and such, and what Mike did and didn't do. But after this period of time, a mutual friend of Mr. Giuliani and of Michael Milken came to Michael. Now, Michael, when he came out of prison, which we're getting a little ahead of ourselves,
Mhm.
diagnosed with prostate cancer and started something called the Prostate Cancer Foundation to
Mhm.
address the problem for men of prostate cancer. How do we
Sure.
find more therapies for this disease? How do we
Mhm.
find a cure for the disease? And became very well known in this area and learned a tremendous amount. A mutual friend called Mike and said, Mr. Giuliani has prostate cancer. Would you be willing to meet with him? Because I think he could use some help.
Mhm.
Mike being who Mike is, rather than being bitter or such, which a lot of people would say, this guy tried to destroy my life. I
Right.
don't really think I'm the one. Go to somebody else. I'm not the only one to
Right.
do this. Mike said, sure, I will meet with him. Mike wants to help people.
Mhm.
And Mike met with him, and I think helped him in many ways. I think Mr. Giuliani appreciated that.
Mhm.
I think he said to Mike, gee, I really didn't know, at the time who you were and such, which is a whole question of whether he should have known or made it his business to know at the time. Uh,
Yeah.
and I think he appreciated that. And I appreciated the fact Mr. Giuliani helped with the pardon. He also helped when we tried to get a pardon earlier from President Bush. But
Mhm.
part of the motivation of Mr. Giuliani is at that point in time, it was more in his interest
Sure.
to to ingratiate himself to the person that asked Mike to meet with him in the first place, and to Mike, than to any way be obstructionist. So I appreciate it. I think he did, to the certain extent, do what you said, felt that this was the right thing to do, and I appreciated his help. I believe the pardon would have happened anyway,
Mhm.
but it was good that he at least tried to help.
Yep. Well, we're getting close to time that we have to wrap it up, but what do you hope that prosecutors, members of the media, maybe the takeaways from what happened to Michael Milken and others now to hopefully stay within their lanes and not to use high profile trials for their own personal gain?
I think I go back to what I said a minute ago, that Mr.
Mhm.
Giuliani at the time said, I didn't know you, I didn't understand,
Mhm.
it made a difference. What I like the takeaway to be is somehow to introduce into the prosecutorial system a downside for pursuing a person so aggressively without asking yourself, what if I'm wrong? What if
Mhm.
you the prosecutor's job is to see that justice is done. This has been indicated by attorney generals, by the United States Supreme Court. Their job is not to win the case. What people have
Mhm.
to understand is, in a criminal prosecution, all the powers with the prosecutor. Prosecutor has a grand jury. Prosecutor can issue subpoenas, get documents, take testimony of people in front of the grand jury. Prosecutors can go to witnesses and give them immunity from prosecution if they can help them. Let
Mhm.
them know if they can't help them, it's okay. But if later they found out they could have helped them, they can indict them.
Mhm.
It can affect a person's willingness to testify, or even how a person's memory is. And so they have tremendous power. It's
Mhm.
power they were given to put away bad guys. I would like to see the system punish a prosecutor that does not ask themselves, especially in a high profile case where they get so much publicity, what if I'm wrong? I'm not going to rely. I can take the position that, hey, let the person's lawyer defend them, but that's not the
Mhm.
prosecutor's job. Prosecutor's job is to see that justice is done. So I would like to see prosecutors have a downside for going after people when they could have discovered that maybe the person did not do all the things that you're trying to prove they did. Don't make it your interest just to win, because you destroy people's lives when you go after them. And most of the people that are trained to do this work are young kids. They're young, bright,
Mhm.
aggressive prosecutors that are led to believe they're doing God's work. They're led to believe
Mhm.
that the person they're going after must have done something wrong, or they wouldn't be going after them.
Mhm.
So I would like to see more balance in the system, and I like to see prosecutors really being required to take the other side and to ask that question of whether or not they are actually going after the right person or doing the right thing.
Okay. And from a media standpoint, it'd be nice if reporters dug into the backgrounds of these people to
Well,
make sure that the person who is being prosecuted needs to be prosecuted, as opposed to maybe, just maybe, things are getting a little out of hand as well. So
well,
there's
goes
the
back
fourth
to
estate. The fourth estate has responsibilities as well.
it sort of goes back to the old saying in your business, Jim, is a better story that, dog bites man or man bites dog. Okay.
True.
It's a
Hmm.
better story to say that this high profile, successful individual did something wrong. And that's why cases like cases that are going on right now get so much publicity. I mean, there are other cases in the courthouse right now of
Right.
people that have done at least as bad of things, if not worse, or may have done bad things. Well, I can't prejudge these cases,
Right.
um, but they're not getting covered. So
Hmm.
it's a much better story that somebody in a high position did something wrong, and then to say that they didn't. And you get headlines for one, and you don't get headlines for the other.
Well, you brought Ted Turner's name up a little earlier. Um, One of his first news directors was a gentleman by the name of Reese Schoenfeld. And Reese used to tell us, I don't want press releases. I want stories. Give me depth. Don't give me a press release. And so that's what we need. We need prosecutors who stay in their lane, and we need reporters who don't take the press release and believe that's the person. Find out who this person is. So if it jives that they should be prosecuted, then so be it. If it doesn't, then tell the world that what we got here is maybe a stretch beyond what we should be.
And I hope people will have an opportunity to look at the book and understand that the story of Michael Milken could happen to a lot of people, but they can understand who Mike himself is a very, as you said at the beginning, is a fascinating individual. And his
Mhm,
story is an interesting story, who he is,
mhm,
how he got to where he got to, what he has done since this happened. Rather than being bitter, he basically got up, dusted himself off, and said, how am I going to make the world better? How am I going to
mhm,
be productive? And that's how he's driven his life.
mhm,
There's going to be a major conference here in Los Angeles in 3 weeks. We do it every year
mhm,
called Milken Institute Global Conference. They're going
mhm.
to have 5,000 people from around the world
Wow.
coming to address society's most serious issues um,
Mhm,
that affect business, that affect investing, that affect health, that affect education, that affect the geopolitical world. This is something that he's created, and people should understand kind of who he is and how he went about it and what happened to him and what has he done about it.
there you go. Well, we've got to bring this to a close, but before we do, everybody should read your book, Witness to a Prosecution: Myth of Michael Milken. It reads like a novel, but it also has some really good, you know, nuggets in there, and phenomenal book. Highly recommend. In the show box below, folks, there's a link to where you can buy the book on Amazon. Please check that out. And Richard, you have the last word, my friend. I like to call this part, and it's my term, not yours, shameless plug. So if there's something you wish to let people know about that they could help, you mentioned about the cancer situation, other philanthropic endeavors. If there's any of that that you would like to promote now, please feel free to do it.
Well, I'd like people to kind of look at, if they're interested in the story and who Mike is,
Mhm,
look at the project that he is now doing in Washington, D.C., called the Milken Center for Advancing the American Dream. It's
mhm,
all about hope. It's about the American dream. Is it alive and well? We believe yes. Can
mhm,
it be made available more easy for more people? Yes. But we're telling the stories of over 10,000 people, what their view is of the dream. It's based
mhm,
on the work Mike's done in education and healthcare
mhm,
and financial markets and with supporting entrepreneurs. And it's going to be in our nation's capital, very close to the White House, across from the
mhm,
Treasury Department. And I think you get a good sense of who he is, the kind of people he's helped and supported, and really what this country's all about. And in these days, you could use some hope and positive information about our future.
That's a very good point.
We're realistic, but we're trying to also be productive.
Well, thank you, Richard Sandler. We have enjoyed the conversation. We hope that you'll come back and talk again, perhaps about other issues with the Milken Institute and things that you're doing. Fantastic book. We thank you for writing it. We thank you for talking about it. And hopefully in the not too distant future, people will, if they haven't bought the book, go get it right now. It's a very good read. And it's a fun read from a standpoint of historical. So if you like history, if you like finance, this is your book. Okay, so go get it. Richard, thanks so much for being with us, everybody. Until next time, the Politically Correct Podcast, I'm Jim Williams. And thanks to Richard and the team. We'll be back next week. So take care, everybody.